The storm America tried to unleash on the world is now circling back with a vengeance. After years of mounting pressure, the European Union has finally struck, unleashing a wave of sanctions aimed directly at the heart of the U.S. economy. Tariffs, market restrictions, whispered threats of more to come. America's closest allies are turning the screws, and the consequences could be catastrophic. As factories stall and political alliances fracture, one brutal question remains. Has Trump's trade war doomed America to global isolation? Let's find out. The trade war backfires. How Trump pushed Europe over the edge. Donald Trump believed the world would cave. Instead, he pushed Europe into open defiance. When Trump slapped a 25% tariff on EU steel and aluminum in March 2025, and then piled on a sweeping 10% tariff on all imports in April, the European Union faced a choice: capitulate or fight back. They chose war. On April 9, 2025, the EU unleashed 21 billion euros in retaliatory tariffs, targeting everything from American soybeans to motorcycles. Their strategy was cold and calculated: strike American industries tied to Trump's political base, hit where it hurts, and send a message Washington couldn't ignore. Orange juice from Florida? Targeted. Poultry from the South? Targeted. Motorcycles from Wisconsin? Bullseye. And they weren't bluffing. By April 15th, the first wave of tariffs was set to hammer U.S. exporters, with billions more lined up if talks failed. For decades, the U.S. and Europe stood together against common threats. Now, thanks to reckless trade wars, they stood on opposite sides of a battlefield. One America never thought it would have to cross. Europe strikes back. Tariffs designed to hurt America's heartland. The EU didn't just retaliate, they retaliated with precision. Every tariff was a scalpel, designed to cut into the economic arteries of Trump's America. Agricultural states, already reeling from Canadian and Chinese sanctions, now faced a brutal new blow. Soybean farmers lost their second-largest market overnight. Orange growers in Florida, still struggling from last year's hurricanes, now watch their exports dry up completely. And the motorcycle industry, symbols of American freedom and manufacturing prowess, took a devastating hit, with European buyers turning away from iconic U.S. brands like Harley-Davidson. The damage wasn't abstract. Europe's message was clear: if Trump wanted a trade war, Europe would make sure it was fought in the streets and fields of America's most vulnerable communities. And the political consequences? Already, murmurs of rebellion echoed through Republican strongholds. This wasn't just an economic fight, it was becoming a political time bomb, ticking louder with every day that passed. The Great Pause. Can fragile talks save a crumbling alliance? At the last moment, the EU extended an olive branch, but it came with a blade hidden inside. On April 10th, just one day after unleashing its tariff list, the EU announced a 90-day pause on retaliatory measures, hoping for last-ditch negotiations. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen framed it as a chance for serious dialogue, but made it brutally clear: if talks failed, the tariffs would return. And they would come back harder. The EU wasn't backing down. Behind the diplomatic smiles, preparations continued. Tariff expansions targeting an additional $19 billion of U.S. goods were locked and loaded. New measures, including service sector penalties and restrictions on U.S. tech companies like Meta and J.P. Morgan, were discussed in hushed meetings across Brussels. The clock was ticking. If by July 14th Trump's administration hadn't offered real concessions, the EU's economic war machine would roar back to life, hitting America's most profitable sectors where it hurt the most. For Trump, the gamble had reached a dangerous tipping point. For Europe, patience was wearing thin, and the knives were already out. Automotive carnage. U.S. factories brace for impact. The first tremors were already being felt on the factory floors that Europe's tariffs were poised to strike a brutal blow to America's automotive sector, an industry already battered by Canada's sanctions and China's rising dominance. Exports of U.S.-built vehicles to Europe, worth $50 billion in 2023, now faced collapse. Tariffs on parts, finished vehicles, and even raw materials like steel and aluminum meant costs would skyrocket, slicing deep into razor-thin profit margins. In Detroit, whispers turned to warnings. Automakers like Ford and GM faced impossible choices: eat the costs and lose millions, or pass them on to consumers and watch sales crater. Factories in Michigan, Ohio, and Indiana prepared for the worst. Production lines slowed, orders shrank. Suppliers, the fragile web of small businesses feeding the auto giants, braced for bankruptcies. And the workers? They faced the same cruel fate that had already befallen thousands in farming and manufacturing towns across the Midwest. Layoffs, lost pensions, broken promises. Trump's steel tariffs were supposed to save American jobs. Instead, they ignited an economic inferno that now threatened to consume one of the nation's most vital industries. Creative retaliation, Europe's secret weapons against America. While Washington focused on tariffs, Brussels was preparing an even deadlier arsenal. Beyond goods, the EU eyed America's true economic jugular, services. With a €109 billion surplus in services, the US dominated Europe's tech, finance, and digital markets. Companies like JP Morgan, Google, Meta, pillars of American wealth, relied heavily on smooth access to European consumers. If talks failed, EU officials hinted, they would strike there next. Investment restrictions, licensing hurdles, new taxes on tech giants, public procurement bans that locked US firms out of lucrative European contracts. And the weaponry wasn't just theoretical. The EU's anti-coercion instrument, passed in 2023, gave Brussels sweeping powers to retaliate swiftly and surgically without waiting for WTO approval. For Trump's America, already reeling from tariff wars, such a move would be catastrophic, cutting off lifelines to the world's largest combined economy outside the US itself. Europe wasn't just retaliating, it was rewriting the rules of global economic warfare. Isolation and decline. Has the US triggered its own fall? The walls are closing in. With China locking down Asian markets, Canada severing agricultural ties, and Europe preparing its next devastating blow, the United States faces a chilling new reality: global isolation. Allies are hedging their bets, rivals are circling like sharks. Trump's vision of an America-first economy has instead produced a hollowed-out shell. Factories slowing, farmers going bankrupt, tech giants under siege. The US, once the undisputed architect of global trade, now finds itself locked out of the very system it built. And the bitter truth? This wasn't a foreign conspiracy. It was a self-inflicted wound carved deep by arrogance, short-sightedness, and political theater. The world is moving on, new alliances are forming, and America, raging at a shifting tide it can no longer command, risks being left stranded on the wrong side of history. The game has changed and America's dominance is no longer guaranteed. As sanctions pile up and old alliances crumble, the cost of isolation grows heavier by the day. If you want to stay ahead of these global shocks, subscribe now and join us as we expose the next chapters in the battle for the future.